does your life taste like? Hi, welcome to 5 Minute Fika, where we find the time to do a little self-care of the soul by thinking about true and beautiful things. Well, this week I made cookies. And if you know me at all, you know that I love to bake cookies. In fact, one of the things that we used to do in Germany is we would have cookie day. On the first Saturday of every month, a whole bunch of kids would come over to our apartment and we would bake like 200 cookies. So I had all these different recipes and I would put the kids in different groups and each group had a different recipe and we would spend like an hour baking all this different dough. Then they would all watch movies and they would decorate boxes and we would make grilled cheese while I put them all in the oven all afternoon long. Because what we did with all the cookies is we would put them in these beautifully decorated boxes and we would take them downtown to a homeless shelter for women who lived on the street because it was a birthday party. Because we figured if you were living on the street, then no one was celebrating your birthday. I have so many stories of people baking spatulas accidentally into the cookies. Or, you know, I'd have to go from group to group to say, okay, oh, a teaspoon of salt is very different than a tablespoon of salt. And you want just a quarter cup of milk, not a whole cup of milk. The recipe is really important. Recipes are very important because they dictate what your cookie is going to turn out like. If you put a tablespoon of salt instead of a teaspoon of salt into a cookie, the whole batch is going to get ruined. In fact, if you added something like, I don't know, onions to a cookie recipe, the whole batch is going to taste like onions. It's going to be ruined. Following the recipe is important. If you want this recipe actually is very similar to one for Ben's Cookies, which is this wonderful place in London. And they make the most wonderful cookies you can imagine. They sell them by weight. But every one of them is so delicious and so good. You know that feeling when you get a warm chocolate chip cookie and a glass of milk and nothing else is like it in the world? They make the best chocolate chip cookies. And I knew that if I looked hard enough, I could find somewhere a recipe that would get me close. And so for months I did. I looked in cookbooks and I looked on websites and I tried and I dug and I experimented with a whole bunch of different recipes until finally, in an obscure Australian women's magazine, I found a recipe that got me very close, as close as I think I'm going to get, to a real Ben's cookie. So I finally found this recipe. So I would never ruin it with onions, but if I want it to taste like this, I have to follow the recipe exactly. And I think a lot of us want a certain kind of life. We want to be happy and we want to be satisfied and we want to be fulfilled with our lives. But we're using recipes that aren't going to get us there. Or we might have the recipe, but we're not following the recipe exactly. So instead of a teaspoon of salt, we're putting a tablespoon of salt in. If you want a cookie that tastes like Ben's Cookies, you have to follow the recipe and you have to follow it exactly. A lot of us want lives that are filled with joy or fulfillment or with hope, but we're using the wrong recipe. Or maybe we have the right recipe, but we're not using the right ingredients. We're swapping things out. You know, instead of gratitude, we have envy. Instead of joy, we have bitterness. When you put bitterness in a life, it's like putting onions in your cookie recipe. It's going to affect the flavor of the whole thing. Your whole life is going to taste different. If you want something that tastes like a chocolate chip cookie, you add flour and sugar and butter and eggs and chocolate chips. You don't add onions. And if you want a life that tastes like goodness and faithfulness, then those are the ingredients you add in. You don't add bitterness or jealousy or anger. And there are a lot of things that we can control about the ingredients that come into our lives, right? Sure, there are things we can't control. You can't control circumstances and you can't control situations and you can't control other people, but you can control your responses to them. And you can control the influences in your life. Your influences become ingredients. They're definitely affecting the flavor of who you are. So that's who you hang out with and what you read and what you listen to and what you watch. What are the things that are filling your mind? What are the ingredients that are coming into your head? Because those ingredients that are coming into your head, those influences, are going to impact what you say and what you think and what you do. And it's going to affect the flavor of your whole life. Again, a little bit of onions are going to flavor this whole batch of cookies to taste like onions. A little bit of bitterness is going to flavor the whole batch of your life to taste a little bit like bitterness. And don't we all want to have the kind of life that when people walk away, they say, man, I want that recipe. I want the recipe of what that person has. I want my life to taste like theirs. I want that kind of flavor in my life. All of us have a flavor to our lives. And all of us can control that flavor. Well, if you have a life that doesn't taste maybe the way that you want it to, maybe it's time to change the recipe. What is it that's the strongest flavor in your life? What is it that people experience when they come around you? What is it that you want them to experience when they come around you? Because those are the ingredients to put in. You know, we function an awful lot like a cookie. Really, we're the result of the recipe. So what recipe are you using? It's really important, because this is the only life you've got. And it's good to be alive. And you're not in this alone. And you, my darling, are spectacular. Have a great day.